Hello, Degrassi readers, and welcome back to Bruce Mackey's Library. Hey, it's editing me. Sorry, I know it's a bit early for editing me, right? But due to very sensitive topics in this episode, I had to send it off to my friend Jocelyn Claiborne, aka Degrassi Kid, for a second opinion before they even put it on their Patreon. So, due to that, I will be editing in their second opinion throughout this episode just to give it balance and extra love and care. So, you will hear editing me pop in a few times just to give that out. Because I didn't expect the large amount of triggering things throughout this episode, I also did not include a second episode novelization like I did in Lisa Makes the Headlines. So if you want to skip after these trigger warnings, you won't be missing that aspect. And when I first recorded this, I did add one in, but it made it 2 hours long. And it would have taken away a lot of attention from the very important things that are brought up in this book. So I just didn't want to do that. And I hope y'all are okay with that. And I hope y'all still love this episode. And I want y'all to know that I am open to any conversation or criticism that these topics bring up. And I want to make sure I'm handling it correctly. So please let me know what you think and reach out to me if you have opinions or different points of view. Thank you. And a huge thank you to Jocelyn for helping out. I love y'all. And now we'll go back to recording me. Before we get started on this episode, I do have to give massive trigger warnings, and I'm really, really sorry. But this is for the book Griff Makes a Date. So the first obvious trigger warning that I have to give is the episode and the book both say the R slur. I will not be saying this word, but it is included. Therefore, there's a sensitive topic of people with mental differences, is how I would like to describe it, I guess. So just be wary of that if that's something that is triggering to you, as well as, sadly, fatphobia and racism seem to be sprinkled throughout, as well as classism. And okay, editing me would like to add in a trigger warning for religious connotation, as well as, I don't say this word, but there is a slur that starts with the letter M that stands for little people. It's in the book, but I don't say it. And when I Googled it, it said it was a slur, so I'm adding in that trigger warning. If there's anything else, I'll add it in right before I mention the thing. And I'll be giving trigger warnings throughout before each thing is mentioned. But if, due to these reasons, you do not want to finish this episode, I just want to say that I totally understand. And in the month of September, which is next month, I'll be doing an episode on banned books. So if you have any opinions on banned books or anything like that, you can message them to me on Instagram at Lucy0520. That is LUCEY0520. And I'll share them throughout the episode if you would like. Thank you, and I hope you have a great month. Now to get actually into this book. This is the book Griff Makes a Date, and it was published on the same day as Lisa Makes the Headlines, which is January 1st, 1986. Our authors are the same, and so are our designer, illustrator, and editor. So if you would like to hear more about them, then you can go back to the Lisa Makes the Headlines episode. The rating on Goodreads is 2.67 stars overall. There is 1 2-star rating and 2 3-star ratings. And I will be reading this from the archive.org copy. So there's a link to that in the description. The dust jacket has an advertisement for the book Lisa Makes the Headlines, and I will read that advertisement for you. It says, another Kids of Degrassi Street book. Lisa makes the headlines and other stories. And it has the stories listed in the order of Lisa makes the headlines, Irene moves in, and Cookie goes to hospital. I'm not sure why, but these are in the wrong order, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. The archive.org copy is of a hardcover from the Education Library at Queen's University at Kingston in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Digitized by the Internet Archive in 2023 with funding from Kali/Austin Foundation. And this book is dedicated to Yan Moore. He is the producer and writer of Degrassi. He started in 1979 with Kids of Degrassi Street and stayed till the very end. Yan was born on February 6, 1953. He was also the creator and producer of another Linda Schuyler show called Riverdale. He was nominated for a Gemini Award in 1995 for Best Writing in a Dramatic Series for his work on Road to Avonlea, as well as a Cable Ace Award nomination in 1995 for Dramatic Series with this same show. In 2018, he won a Kids Screen Award for Best Non-Animated or Mixed Series for Teens/Tweens with Degrassi Next Class. He also wrote the little-known short Danger, Keep Out, which is similar to an episode of Kids of Degrassi Street that he wrote called Ryan Runs for Help. If you want more information on Yan, Jocelyn did interview him, and I will be linking that interview down below in the description. This was really a shortened description of him that I found on IMDb/Wikipedia, so please go check that out. And the dedication reads, for Yan who gave us Griff, and for all the kids who brought the characters to life. The episodes featured in this book are, in the order that they're featured, Rachel Runs for Office, Griff Makes a Date, and Jeffrey Finds a Friend. While Rachel Runs for Office comes first in this book, it is actually episode number 17, which places it after Griff Makes a Date, which is number 17, and before the last episode, which is covered in this book, Jeffrey Finds a Friend, that is episode 20. So if I were to rework this book, I personally think we should have it be Martin Meets the Pirates, where we first meet Griff, then Griff Makes a Date, which is where he pops up again and falls for Lisa. Then Jeffrey Finds a Friend. Then Lisa gets the picture, where they start to get over their issues and get along again. And then I would do Griff Gets a Hand, as to tell his whole story in one book. Because, that would make it more of a character book. And Griff gets 2 books back to back with his name on the cover. Griff has a really good character arc, and I feel like Griff is the character where they perfected character arcs around this time, and he deserves the whole character book treatment. That's what I would give him. As well as just these episodes don't fit super well together. Jeffrey Finds a Friend does fit really well together, actually, with Griff Makes a Date, with Griff in general. It's Rachel Runs for Office that kind of ruins it, and I feel like Griff could use a whole character book where all of his important episodes are put together. And while Yan did write 2 of these episodes, he wrote Griff Makes a Date and Jeffrey Finds a Friend. Those 2 should be dedicated to him in this book. John Bertram actually wrote Rachel Runs for Office. So it's quite a mystery as to why that is included in the book, dedicated to Yan as well as with Griff on the namesake, since Griff isn't even in Rachel Runs for Office. It just doesn't make sense. It feels like they kind of threw in a female-led episode as to not deter females completely from the book. while I suspect that they put a male lead side by side to follow Lisa as to still appeal to the male audience, and then they paired it up to be published on the same day as Lisa because Lisa and Griff go so well together and they're in the show. They have a really good relationship, in my opinion, that's cute and age appropriate for them, regardless of the reasons or my suspicions of what the reasons are. And I would love to hear what you think the reasons are. Our first episode in this book is Rachel Runs for Office, written by John Bertram, and it premiered on February 1st, 1985, which is just a little under a year before this book was published. While Griff Makes a Date premiered on January 18th, 1985, and was written by Yan Moore. While Griff Makes a Date premiered on January 18th, 1985, just over a year before this book was published. And lastly, Jeffrey Finds a Friend premiered on February 8th, 1985, a week after Rachel Runs for Office, and a little over a year before this book was published. And our notes for Rachel Runs for Office starts now with the illustration. Each of these 3 episodes has an illustration right before the novelization of the episode starts. And Rachel Runs for Office's illustration is Billy and Rachel having their little standoff when Rachel is holding her copies from the copy store, and Lynn is standing there with his Rachel for Office sandwich board, and the quote says, Billy eyed her suspiciously. What have you got there? Just something I'm going to give everyone to read before they vote tomorrow. Rachel hugged her papers closer. So this is around the middle of the episode, yet they put it right before the episode even began. I do feel like while this is a good illustration, it should be placed next to where the actual event is happening, and I feel like it could use more illustrations throughout this story, as well as a few of the others. I'll get to that though. So, sadly, the Fatphobia trigger warning starts right around the first line. The first line says, Rachel Hewitt liked to be early for school. She wasn't built for speed, and a comfortable amble with her nose deep in a book suited her fine. So I did have to Google what a comfortable amble is. Apparently, it's just a leisurely stroll. But we didn't need to put that she wasn't built for speed. It's okay to just enjoy a leisurely stroll. And we get to see a picture of her right before we read this. So we know what she looks like. We don't need to insult the character or the actress who's a child and an actual human being by saying that. And I'm just going to say it, big people can be fast, but also skinny people can be slow. You can just be whatever size you are and be whatever speed you're built for, and it's okay. But if we do open with Rachel reading a book while she walks in the episode, so I love that we included it, and it just, the rest of it feels like a bit of an insult. So, yeah, I'm sorry to Arlene Lott and the character Rachel and anyone who feels offended by that, like I did. Anyway, next the book says that she was hit with a frisbee on the shoulder, but if you go back to the episode, she was actually hit in the forehead, which probably hurt. And the book says that she just finished checking both ways, but if you go back and watch it, she does not. And then we get some more small information, although this is also repeated in the episode. Rachel is in grade 5. Hey, it's editing me again. Actually, Rachel is more than likely in grade 6. According to Degrassi Kid's correction, in Canada, elementary school runs from grade 1 to grade 6. A senior would be a 6th grader. In most of America, it's grade 5, and I just didn't think it through. Didn't think to Google it. So thank you, Jocelyn, for the double check. And that actually helps me figure out the timeline for other Degrassi shows way better. So just thank you. I truly appreciate it. I don't know why I didn't think to Google it. Anyway, back to recording me. We find out that Ben and Lynn are in grade 3. And then we also find out that Lynn's last name is Yu. Now, while this isn't about him really, I'm just like curious now because we have Yik Yu and Lin Yu. So does that mean that Lin and Yik are related? Who knows? I'm curious. I think that's something I would love to ask somebody because this does now connect the Kids of Degrassi Street universe to the Degrassi Junior High universe, if you choose to let it mean that they are related. The next thing I have is just a small quote that I thought was funny. On page 4, Rachel says, "No razzmatazz." So it just says, "Just a vote in class with no razzmatazz. Besides," she added, "we haven't even had the nominations yet." I just like the word razzmatazz and wanted to point that out. I think it's fun. It's what I'm guessing is like swag or Riz, but I could be so wrong because I don't really know what Riz means. But I'm guessing that's what that is. Like a little extra something, something. Sparkle, jazz. Yeah. And then this is the same page where we get the quote, "Every school gets to send a representative from its senior class." And that is how we find out that Rachel is in grade 5, because that is the senior class of an elementary school, is the 5th grade. And then scroll on to page 5, where Benjamin says, he says this Young People's Council will be a great way to get his name in the newspaper. And this is kind of where we find out that Billy has been talking to Ben about this for a while, and Ben already knows that he's going, like his brother's going to be nominated, and Billy only wants this to be in the newspaper. He thinks it'll help him later on in life, but he doesn't actually want to do it. And we get a closer look at Rachel's feelings knowing this ahead of time. And these lines aren't said in the episode. They are most likely added for suspense of Rachel's nomination, as well as to show the relationship between these 3 characters. They add in Ben helping Billy to show the tension between the brothers, as well as to give him something to be distracted by as the car speeds on. They also say that, and I quote, oh gosh, trigger warning for Fatphobia again, sorry. Rachel is taller and heavier than most of the other kids, but carried her extra weight with a certain aplomb. That's spelled Aplomb. So I might be saying a plump wrong, or a blump. Either way, that is defined, because I had to Google it, as a state of mind or a manner marked by easy coolness and freedom from uncertainty. Just meaning that she's fine with her weight. I, as the reader, would like it if it hadn't already been brought up twice in this, that Rachel is bigger than most people. Yeah, I don't feel like that was necessary. But I'll quote exactly where this says this. On page 5, it says, "Later that morning, Rachel sat in class, looking as solid and composed as always. She was taller and, I'm so sorry, and heavier than most of the kids, but she carried her extra weight with a certain aplomb. Her broad, pretty features usually registered as an expression of calm assurance that most of the time was an accurate reflection of her feelings." So I do like that we get to see that Rachel has an anxiety. That's something that's important to express and can be like a recognizable, relatable feeling for the readers. But we don't need to point out Rachel's size twice within 5 pages. Just not good. Also, this is a book for kids. I, as a 29-year-old, should not have to Google a word you are using to describe a child in a children's book. Therefore, you could have just said confidence or just something that's a recognizable word. Thank you. On to page 6, please. So, my note for page 6 says, I do enjoy that they point out she often covered up anxiety with, and I quote, an expression of calm assurance. It is nice to see them build her character with this background. They also put in Billy's quote about hockey practice before Jeffrey's nomination of himself. When in the episode, Jeffrey nominates and unnominates himself before this quote is said. So that's where it says, look, Billy, sports is great for a few years, but this could be your whole future. A side note that's not really on my notes, I noticed this when I was watching on Pluto TV. This is the same line that Bianca says when she nominates Drew for president. It's not really important, but actually it feels really important. It just feels like it really gives it a nice bow, and I'm very curious if they noticed that they did that, and like if they did it on purpose, or if it's just a weird coincidence. But yeah, Bianca really thinks that leadership could be Drew's whole future, the same way Pete thinks that it could be Billy's whole future. Which, if you're in the canon of Pete and Billy are kind of gay, this helps support that. And I'm in that camp. So, just saying. Anyway, on page 13, we get the lyrics for Billy's campaign song. And we do get to hear them in the episode, but like it's not very clear because it's kind of an old show. So I just want to repeat them. It's vote for Billy, he's the best. So much better than the rest. Vote for Billy, he's our man. Who can prove it? Billy can. And this is where I have the note. Honestly, I feel like there's a Billy to Tiny pipeline forming in my head. So this kind of formed in my head because the dance that Billy does is very similar to the dance that Tiny does in the opening theme song credits of Next Class. And they're both really cute. They're both adorable. I love both dances. I don't know, it just popped in my head. I was like, oh my gosh, she's so tiny. Like, if Tiny had run for president, then there'd be a Billy to Tiny pipeline. I'm just saying, Tiny for Prez. I'm just saying. If you reboot with Next Class characters, Tiny for Prez of all of Canada. I know Canada doesn't have a president, but I don't care. Tiny for Prez. Anyway, my next few notes are just naming some people who are not named in the show, but are named in this book, and I think it's important to name them. So on page 13, Jan Holland is the one who remembers Rachel had once helped her study for a big test, and she said that she would know how she'd vote. This happens at the 6 minute and 56-second mark in the episode. And then again on page 14, Heidi Zander is the one who says, Rachel has a great deal of experience at organizing a great deal of things. This happens at the 7 minute and 2 second mark of the episode. And then again on page 14, we get Judy Erickson saying, before I make up my mind, I want to see an all candidates debate. And then the book says that Nick Jennings is, and I quote, the jerk wearing 2 Billy buttons that shoves her out of the way. But in the show, there's no shove, just a staticky screen. I wonder why they added this in, says my notes. This happens at the 7 minute and 3 second mark through the 7 minute and 12 second mark. And then again on page 14, we have Rachel's office. Rachel's office sign says in the book, Rachel Hewitt, your candidate for the Young People's Council, will discuss your concerns. Come over and have Rachel listen. Then she'll speak out for you. Office hours from 3 to 5. but in the episode it says 9 to 5. So it's obvious that they just weren't thinking it through all the way when they made the sign for props, because from 9 to 3 would be school hours. So it realistically should be 3 to 5, and they just didn't think it through. It also says that Lynn arrived and complained about not being able to vote. This was not in the episode, so they just added it in the book. And then on page 15, Rachel feels my feels, says my notes. So that is there because it says Rachel thought they were dumb to be fooled by a load of gimmicks, but answered carefully when she said, well, a lot of kids like Billy. Honestly, I do just feel like a lot of people are fooled by a load of gimmicks. And I don't know if that really makes them dumb or just like easily entertained. But either way, that felt my feels, according to my notes. Also, they changed Rachel's quote from Mom won't get mad if they have mud on their shoes to My mom won't let anyone in the house if they have mud on their shoes. Again, not really a big deal, but I wrote it down, so I'm reading it. Okay, this is where it gets really confusing if you've only ever read the book and didn't know all of the details. But on page 16, it says it's September. This may not seem important now, but later on, as I go through the book, I will point out every time a month is stated, because within the book of Lisa Makes the Headlines that has the stories Cookie Goes to Hospital, Irene Moves In, and Lisa Makes the Headlines, there's no months stated other than the fact that Irene Moves In has a Halloween party, and we know that Halloween is in October. And since we're reading the books and then watching the episodes in the order that they're put in the books, it really can make things confusing to put the months in if you don't think it through with the way things are published. So that's why it makes it important when otherwise it might not feel so important. But throughout this book, every single episode says what month it is, and it makes things very confusing when you know that the episodes are out of order, as well as it just really pushes things closer together, and it just does not make sense. Anyway, page 16, it's September. Remember that. It is September. Okay. Page 19 says Billy failed to notice he turned the paper over. Yeah, I wrote this down because I thought this was like funny. And you probably noticed it in the episode, but I did not realize what was going on. And I thought Billy and Pete just didn't realize they didn't write a full speech. So Billy glared at him, shook the creases out of the paper, and failed to notice that he accidentally turned it over. He continued in a loud, self-assured voice. And in conclusion, my friends, let me say that the road ahead will not be easy, but with your faith in me, we can all share in a brighter tomorrow. I thank you. So he just didn't notice it. Also, Heidi Zander comes back again, and she's the girl who asked, I would like to know what Billy's qualifications are to do with government-related work. So I just wanted to give her a name again. Page 20 says, spectators clapped heartily while Judy called for order. But on the show, no one clapped and there was no call for order. They also cut out Judy's quote, and then after Lynn asks why they can't vote, she says, because you're not in Rachel and Billy's class. That's the quote of Judy's they cut out. And then my next note is for page 24. They cut her yelling and telling him to be careful. And I put that because when Lynn and Rachel are talking about Billy and Pete signing wrappers of bubblegum, Lynn told Rachel, you know what? While you're at the photocopy store, I'm going to look for something better. And Rachel yells, okay, let me know if you find it. He headed off in the direction of the clubhouse. Rachel couldn't help smiling. Lynn was a good kid, and she appreciated his support, but she doubted that there was anything he could do. As he stepped off the sidewalk into the street, a speeding car raced by, barely missing him. Rachel shook her head. She'd nearly lost her entire fan club. So in the episode, when that happens, Rachel yells and tells him to be careful. But they cut that out of the book, and I don't know why. And then on page 25, they changed Ben's quote from, "How do you mean?" to "What do you mean?" This is where I put a small trigger warning for possible racism and classism. I don't know if they were trying to make him seem more proper or not. This is really just a speculation for me because of just like the way things are sprinkled throughout the book that feel racist to me as a white person. So I don't really know, but yeah. They could have just cut it out to make him seem more mature and like to not have what feels like improper grammar, I guess. But honestly, it feels fine to me. They're kids, as well as just like that's how people talk. People say, "How do you mean where I live?" like all the time, and I don't know if that's wrong or not, to be honest. Even teachers say that where I live, so I don't know. Hey, editing me here to give a second opinion from Jocelyn. Jocelyn's message says, "I think it's a big leap to say that the small grammar changes in one student's dialogue is racism. There's a lot of moments in this episode where there are clear examples of racism. Those moments feel really heavy and racist, but in comparison, the language thing doesn't feel like an act of racism to me. So it feels like a strange thing to stack up there with everything else." And yeah, editing me does agree. I think note taking me and recording me were just really probably not in a great mood. And I did not know what was to come when I took my notes because I take them as I'm reading. And Jocelyn's notes were coming after they had listened to the whole thing. So please do know this pales in comparison with what you're about to hear later on, which is why I didn't mention it, even though it was mentioned in their message. So if you agree with Jocelyn, or you agree with recording me, or just whatever, either way, like, if you don't want to hear more racism than this, please leave now. Just to take good care of yourself and just know that you are loved, and I didn't want this. And like maybe I just felt a bit of a personal attack because I often do say things like, "How do you mean?" instead of "What do you mean?" or just like I have a trouble with grammar and a speech impediment and all that. So it felt more like classism to me than racism. And I don't know, I could have been wrong. It could have just been nothing. It could have just been grammar, since this is written by an actual professional author. So, like, I don't know. But I hope adding in that second opinion adds some balance and care. Anyway, back to recording me. They also cut Lynn saying, "It is?" And Ben's response of, "Yeah," after Ben says, "It's just one of Billy's dumb stories." It also says that he suddenly realized he was talking to himself and he noticed Lynn had left. But we didn't see that in the show. And this is where I put it would have been interesting to see Ben's reaction to Lynn leaving after such a big combo. It also says Ben stopped at his house and picked up a sandwich board that says Rachel runs for office on his way to the photocopy shop. But in the show, he's already wearing that at the clubhouse, and he got it from Rachel's porch. So I don't know why they changed that and why they added in the extra stop. I think they just remembered that they used that picture of him wearing it and forgot to mention that it was there. So they needed to add in him getting it. And then on page 27, I have another note that says, "They change up the quotes again here. They cut Lynn saying, 'But it means Billy lied about his father at the debate.' And Rachel's quote of, 'I just don't think it has anything to do with the campaign.'" I don't really know why they cut those. Maybe they just forgot they were said. I'm not sure. And then on page 28, they cut Billy saying, "We sure signed a lot of rappers today." And they change it to Pete saying, "We sure gave away a lot of gum." I'm not sure why they cut a Billy quote and added in a Pete one. You can come to your own conclusions. I really don't know. And maybe it doesn't seem important to anyone. I just noticed it, I guess. And then on page 29, they changed quotes again. In the show, Billy asks, "What are you making copies of?" But here they put him asking, "What have you got there?" I'm not really sure why. And then I also have a note that says they really added some suspense. I'll have to read this part off the book. So this part is, "In the darkness of the secluded laneway, a cat hissed as Billy moved past on silent feet. A dog barked in the distance, and another cat, invisible in the shadows, squalled defiance. Night noises seemed to make the darkness disappear. Billy crept to the foot of an old iron staircase and waited. He heard a door open somewhere above, followed by the clang of shoes on metal as descending feet approached. A flashlight shone into Billy's eyes." All of that is in the episode. I just really liked the way they wrote it. It felt suspenseful to me. And then on page 32, it says, "Connie shoved the mic in Lynn's face after talking about what the surveys say about the race. But she didn't. In the show, they just cut to Lynn talking to Rachel as she cleans up her porch." So Lynn wasn't even with Connie while she was doing the surveys and interviews. And then on page 33, it says, "He was tugging at her arm." But maybe this is a metaphor because he wasn't on the porch and she was on the porch. He was all the way down on the sidewalk. So they also skip a lot of the interviews that Connie did. Sadly, this is where another trigger warning comes in. This is sadly our trigger warning for racism. And I say this with a question mark because I don't even think this would be considered good if it wasn't in a reference to a character of color. And just adding in the fact that it was just makes it worse, kind of a deal. So, I get trigger warning for racism and what sounds like you're going to unalive a child, which is why it's bad no matter what the color of the person is, but worse because he's a person of color. There's references to lynching in that the first one is, and I quote, "Billy's expression was one of a man about to be lynched." This comes from right here where it says, "Lynn's full of anticipation. Pete's like someone balanced on a tightrope. Billy's like a man about to be lynched." If people knew what had gone on behind the scenes in this campaign, she had only to say the words, and things would never quite be the same again. Really, I don't feel like lynching should be in a child's book, but yeah, it's just, I don't need to explain why this is bad. Then they mentioned it again a few lines after this. I'm so sorry. Trigger warning again. I'm so sorry. Just a few lines after this, where it says, and I quote, "Billy felt the noose fall away from his neck." The exact quote is, "Lynn felt like a burst balloon. Pete was completely baffled, and Billy felt the noose fall away from his neck. Judy was back to organizing." Yeah, I'll just say, in general, not good to say about a child, but worse to say about a child whom is a person of color, and one of the few characters of color at that. Yeah. Could use a big update, if ever reprinted, to say the very least. I am so sorry. We're gonna move on, because there's more racism and classism on the next page, and I am sorry about it. So, trigger warning for classism right here, and racism. On page 35, after it says that Billy tells Mr. Mackey about their agreement, which does not really happen in the show, it also skips over the class voting. and has another racist and classist feeling term when it calls the boombox a G word blaster. The G word is, I'm not going to say it, I'm going to spell it just so you don't confuse it with another G word. Ghetto. Yeah, I don't know why it calls the boombox this, but the literal quote is, totally confused, Mr. Mackey said. Well, perhaps Billy would like to show us the speed bump. Billy? And then it says, he hadn't expected a G blaster. It would, of course, be Pete Riley who had smuggled it into class. He'd have a word with Pete later. Meanwhile, the kids did have something to celebrate. And here's another not great racist classes thing. He supposed he could tolerate a few minutes of this abominable noise. I don't know if everyone is going to feel like calling rap music abominable noise is racist and classist, but to me personally, that did feel racist and classist and not good. Bad to say the least. Yeah, you could have just called the boombox a boombox or a portable radio with a CD player in it. I don't know, like you could have described it in multiple ways, and I don't feel like most people are going to know what you are describing when you call it a G blaster, because the word blaster does not often refer to a musical device. And yeah, it just feels racist and classist and bad. And I don't think you should refer to Billy's song as abominable noise. It's actually a very catchy song, and it's just plain racist to me. And it doesn't feel like something Mr. Mackey would think or feel. It doesn't feel Degrassi to me, and maybe I'm wrong about that. It just doesn't feel like Bruce Mackey to me. So, yeah, that's just bad. Hey, it's editing me here to add in Jocelyn's feedback slash message. They said, I would say the term G Blaster is more a credit to the slang at the time being racist. They got their name from black slash Hispanic people loudly playing or blasting their music in urban communities. So while the term is definitely rooted in racism, it might be good to mention that it's not Degrassi calling it this, but instead the culture in which Degrassi was trying to use. So Degrassi was just trying to use the slang of the time, and I didn't know the slang of the time. I had never heard it before and didn't think to Google it. And I often lived my life in areas that are called this term, and I still do. Due to this, I don't enjoy the term and would definitely like it updated, but it's not Degrassi's fault, I guess. It's kind of just a product of its time. This is similar to their usage of the R slur being a product of its time, along with when Dave says, dude, that's so gay, being a product of its time. Sorry, the last part is kind of commentary on Jocelyn's commentary, but as I listen back, I'm noticing a lot of my own bias towards the classes terms that were used and just wanted to add in more care towards them. That I would like to see changed. I would definitely like this book to be reprinted and updated. So I'm thankful for this second opinion. Maybe I should have Googled the term and just not jumped to the conclusion. But either way, not a great term. Definitely racist feeling, and yeah. I'm thankful to add in this second opinion with love and care. And let's get back to the recording. Love y'all. Um, and it doesn't really stop there, and I'm so sorry. Another trigger warning for Fatphobia. On page 36, where it goes on to say, and all the kids were trying to copy him. Even the new youth council representative was having a go. Though it didn't come naturally to someone her shape and size, still she was making the attempt under Billy's guidance. Again, I don't feel like you need to point out her shape and size. And if you go to the episode, I think she was dancing just fine. Maybe I'm wrong because I don't know a lot about dancing, but just didn't feel like there was anything unnatural about it. Um, it doesn't stop there really. It does go on to say, Rachel, Billy said under his curving arm, thank you for what you didn't say. Um, thank you for what you did say, puffed Rachel, and I only won by 1 vote. I don't think you need to put that she puffed. Hey there, it's editing me here again with Jocelyn's message. It says, I do wonder if Rachel puffed is fatphobia. It felt like a reaction anyone could have to that situation, and not just a fat or bigger person. But that's up to you to decide. Again, a great conversation starter. So this might be another instance where I was just kind of tired of reading this and seeing the fat phobia sprinkled throughout. Kind of added some extra emotions to me. Honestly, I'm not sure. Some people may feel like this isn't fat phobia and she was just breathing heavy because she was dancing. Truly, it's up for discussion. Either way, let us know what you think. And I'm very thankful for this second opinion because, yeah, maybe it wasn't. Who knows? I should give some more levity and balance, you know? So, again, thank you, Jocelyn, for adding that in and giving great feedback. I'm sorry. Yeah, second round of editing here. I don't remember why I left in Daisy's bark, but I think it's cute and maybe she had an opinion she wanted to share. I don't really remember why she was barking, but there you go. Maybe I just wanted to show what was happening at the time while I was recording. Anyway, Daisy has feelings and we love and appreciate them, and dogs rock. So again, I'm gonna keep it in. Love y'all. Back to recording me. And it doesn't stop there either. Billy goes on to say, it doesn't matter, you won fair and square, and if you need any help, anytime, you can count on me, okay? And then it says, how about right now, please, thought Rachel, wondering why she seemed to have 3 left feet and 1 arm. I'm sorry, I have to apologize to myself that I had to read this, as well as y'all, that y'all listened this far. I didn't expect that from an episode where being a plus size person isn't even part of the storyline. I know this is from 1986, but it just feels wrong. As well as this is a kid's book, so hopefully the hopefully if this is ever reprinted, this is corrected. And I'm not just the fat phobia, but also, yes, the racism does need to be corrected. I'm sorry. It's in the book and I didn't expect it, but I have to report it. And breathe deep, hug yourself, take care of yourself, love yourself. You are important. You are loved. This does not reflect the way I feel about anyone. This is just a book. Okay, we're gonna go on. Griff Makes a Date is the next episode novelization. And before we get into the book, there is another illustration. Sadly, this is also the only one for this book. I do feel like, since the main character is someone who draws a lot, that alone should tell us that we need more than one drawing throughout the book. But this drawing is of the scene when Griff gives Danny, our crossing guard, the picture of himself. In the picture in the episode, Danny is helping a duck cross the street, but the duck is not in the drawing in the book. And the quote under the drawing is, Griff said, "It's for you, Danny. I'm sorry about what I said. I didn't really mean it." Danny looked at the paper and beamed with pleasure. "That's me," he said. Okay. Now, if you'll remember, this is on page 39 of the book overall. Remember when we were reading Rachel Runs for Office and I said it's September, and I said to remember that it was September? Well, the very first 2 words are pale November. So, just remember it is November. And then right after that, we have our very first trigger warning, and I am so sorry. I don't really know how to trigger warning this, but he uses what I think is a slur because when I googled it, it said it was a slur. This is a slur for little people. It's the M word. I don't know why they put this in here, but it says that Griff's thoughts were turning a fire hydrant and a garbage can into Mexican little people that start with the letter M. Yeah, I don't know why. The exact words are, his thoughts, far from the classroom, were transforming a fire hydrant and a garbage can into a couple of Mexican M words. Suddenly, a shout from above grabbed his attention. This just felt unnecessary and out of left field to me, and it doesn't feel true to who Griff is, and I don't understand why it was put in there. Like, I like getting the characters' thoughts and what they're thinking about and zoning out about, but, like, you could have just said the fire hydrant turned into a hot dog and the garbage can was a Mountain Dew or lemon lime soda. Make him hungry. Or like a tree instead of a garbage can. Like anything. Or pencils and paper. Or that he just thought about sketching them because that feels very Griff. It just felt weird and unnecessary and just unneeded. You can just take that out if there's a reprint. Please, thank you. And then on page 40, we have our first R word drop. I'm not going to say it, but it does say that my note says calling teachers this does show how the word has lost actual meaning. And the book says that he got the message. It was like reading a code. He knew Duke's words meant take care and have a good day. So to me, I do know that a lot of people don't know how to tell people to have a good day or take care or I love you. So I can understand that awkwardness of not knowing how to say those things, but that doesn't mean you need to go around calling teachers or anyone else the R word. And it just felt uncomfortable to read, even though I know that's what the whole episode is about. It still felt uncomfortable to me. So I just want to let you know that. And then my next note is for pages 41 through 42. It says, I love the added line of Griff's fingers itched to draw him as an eager puppy with a tail wagging, ears alert, heading for a bone, some other dog's bone. Okay, the exact quote is, he shook his head. Pete, sensing a percentage, made his move. What you need's an agent, someone to handle the business side. Me, for instance. Griff's fingers itched to draw him as an eager puppy, tail wagging, ears alert, heading for a bone. Some other dog's bone. No, wait, Pete, he said firmly. So I just thought that was a really good line. And then this page says it's been over a year since Lisa moved. This is important. It's only been 2 episodes, but this kind of tracks with Lisa's mom not expecting during the move, and now having a child who's at least a couple months old. Plus, the Kennards move out, premiered on December 14th, 1984, and Griff Makes a Date premiered on January 18th, 1985. So technically, it's only been a couple of months. Just think that's important. And then on page 43, it says that Lisa explained, and I quote, Noel stayed though. He's going to be working with my uncle, Jack, in his used car business. The exact quote is, didn't you like it out there in Vancouver? Sure, answered Lisa, but Dad wanted to come back. He prefers working for himself. Noel stayed though. He's going to be working with my uncle, Jack, in his used car business. This quote is not in the episode. It does make me curious about things like Joey's used car business and if it's connected in any way, as well as if any of the other books will explain other absences. And then page 44 gives us a really cool insight into Danny's inner thoughts that I would like to read for you. So this is in the middle of page 44. It says, "A faint mist of early Monday morning had drifted away, allowing sunshine to sliver the lightly frosted sidewalks as Danny, the crossing guard, appeared at his post, ready for duty, before the first kids would arrive. He knew he had been entrusted with great responsibilities, and was always careful to be in good time. Every day he carried out his instructions to the letter. He'd wait for suitable moments to halt the traffic. Then, raising his bright red stop sign, he'd blow his whistle and march into the street with pride. He enjoyed the feeling such important work gave him. Like a traffic cop's, his raised hand was the law." This is where it starts to get kind of religious-y. So small trigger warning there, where it says, "Like a shepherd, he guarded his flocks." Words he'd heard somewhere in his childhood often flickered through his mind. Quote, "I am a good shepherd and know my sheep." Danny felt like the good shepherds as he saw the kids safely across the street. It was a fine feeling, being needed, knowing his sheep, smiling at them, having them smile back at him. Guarding the crossing was the highlight of Danny's day. When Griff arrived at the crossing that Monday morning, Danny was on the far side with a group of kids he just escorted across, laughing with his usual daily greeting. "Hi, have yourself a good day." Scornful of help, Griff checked the traffic and started across the street. As Griff stepped off the sidewalk, Danny stopped him and hurried forward, raising his halt sign. "You're supposed to wait for me. You're supposed to wait for me." Griff ignored the crossing guard and walked on past as if he didn't exist. Danny shook his head in mild disquiet. It upset him when one of his sheep went astray. Danny hurried back to where the two girls in colorful woolly caps and mitts were waiting patiently. Here's some trigger warning for racism. I'm so sorry. It says, and I quote, "He recognized the dark-skinned one, but her companion was a new face at the crossing." More racism, as it continues to say, "The dark girl was pointing down the street at Danny's disobedient sheep." So, yeah. While it's nice to get Danny's thoughts in general, because A, he's a side character, and B, he's an adult, we don't often get his thoughts. Maybe don't just say, and I quote, "Danny recognized the dark-skinned one." Her name is Casey. You could just say that Danny recognized Casey. Or you could point out that she's the shorter one. So that's important and unique. Or you could point out something about her smile, or, Danny recognized the one in the blue hat, or whatever. It just felt uncomfortable and awkward. Also, not loving referring to people as sheep, just not only because it has a religious connotation, it does though. I mean, I guess back then sheeple wasn't a thing, but nowadays it is, so in a reprint that would like to be changed. I'd love that. Yeah, it just feels wrong. It just feels uncomfortable to me. But if you want to make it feel less uncomfortable and refer back to the episode, Miss Gonzalez is wearing a sweater with a design of sheeps, and it does have one black sheep. So I'll give it the lightest of maybe symbolism. Editing me here, this wasn't pointed out by Jocelyn, but on the day of my editing, actually one day ago, Degrassi CSI on Instagram posted a picture of this same sweater but in red. It's an ad from a 1984 magazine called McCall's. It's an ad for the Giles and George sheep sweater. And this sweater is also worn by Melanie. So yeah, Melanie wears this sweater in red. There's two pictures of Melanie wearing the sweater in this post from Degrassi CSI on Instagram. So you might want to check that out. I think it's really cool that the style's kind of consistent. And I put a comment that says Miss Gonzalez wore a blue version of this in Griff Makes a Date. I remember because it will be mentioned in the next episode of my podcast. Also, I love Melanie. It's definitely a coincidence since the ad didn't even mention a blue sweater, and neither did Degrassi CSI. I just kind of noticed it when I looked at the post because the sweater definitely stuck out in my brain after reading that thing about sheeps and then watching the episode, since I read and watch at the same time. I'm unsure of what episode these pictures of Melanie are from, but either way, I felt like it would be kind of a miss if I didn't mention it here, even if some people will just say it's just a fun tidbit and not really important. I thought it was good to add in. Anyway, back to recording me. Thank you, Degrassi CSI, for that fun extra bit of information for this episode. I don't know, but it felt uncomfortable to me and slightly racist. Let me know if I'm wrong, but that just didn't feel right to refer to Casey as only the color of her skin. And then my next note is for page 46. I wrote, Griff seems jealous of Lisa, acting as if he wasn't having trouble making friends due to his history with the Pirates gang, but instead due to being, and I quote, new to Degrassi Street School. Also, no one of this age thinks about looks this deeply. And I quote from my notes, but, okay, sure, Jan. LOL. So this is where it says Griff felt more isolated than usual, as what seemed like half the class clustered around the new girl's desk. He'd been at Degrassi Street School for months without making a single friend, and here she was on her first morning, the center of attention. Then he remembered what Pete had told him about the girl who had moved out west and had just come back to Toronto. So this was the famous Lisa. She could afford to look so pleased with life, everyone fussing around her. She was pretty good to look at, though. He liked the way her silky brown hair shone, and the way her eyes would be kind of downcast under her lashes, and then they'd open wide and sparkle. He wondered what color her eyes were, close up. Her nose was cute too. He reached for his pencil and notebook. Yeah, I just don't think a kid would sit there thinking about downcast under her lashes and then they'd open wide and sparkle. But I guess it's nice that it's detailed. And then on page 47, I have a note that says, okay, Pete Riley goes from being like a rotten scoundrel who sneaks in boom boxes and Rachel runs for office to looking like an ideal student here just because he wears glasses. Although this happened before Rachel's episode, if you watched the episodes in order on TV, if you didn't have cable and only got the books, you wouldn't know this order. And this order seems to make Lisa's absence in Rachel Runs for Office more understandable. Anyway, this writer seems to not get a solid understanding of how teachers view him, unless maybe this shows different teachers view a student in different ways. IDK, but I enjoy the thoughts of these side adults. And I wrote that because there's a quote where it says, she hoped the class was really listening. Some of them looked interested, others, as usual, seemed miles away. Casey Rothfels was peering around. Pete Riley, whose glasses gave him appearance of the proverbial ideal student, was likely to be hatching some profitable scheme. So, like, while that is an accurate description of Pete Riley, I just feel like it's weird to think someone is the ideal student or it looks like one simply because they're wearing glasses. And it just felt judgmental and like a little bit classist, because like classes are expensive and being able to afford them does not make you the ideal student. It just felt icky to me. And it's editing me here, editing in a message from Jocelyn, where they said, I feel like saying the glasses comment is classist and a dig at someone's wealth might be a bit of a leap when you compare it to some of the other things that are obviously classist throughout the book. And I guess I could agree. So I'll read my response to that message that they sent me. I said, the glasses thing may have been a bit more personal due to my upbringing as a poor person, due to often relying only on my father's insurance to be able to afford them. I was often not able to afford new glasses without getting a lecture from my father about not taking care of them properly and how his insurance only allowed one person covered under the insurance policy to get a new pair every other year, even though you're supposed to get your eyes checked and a new pair every 6 months, according to what my eye doctor says. But this may actually be different under the whole universal healthcare thing that's in Canada, lucky ducks, and different insurance policies that people have. So, really, it's a case by case situation on whether or not this is classist, and it just felt personal to me. But that seems to be the case. We all have our own biases and opinions and context and all that. So, maybe it's just different where you are. So, I guess you can think of this as another conversation starter. Whether you agree or disagree or whatever context you have, just want you to feel loved and know that I took care with this. Because I truly do wish that everyone in the world had universal health care and peace and goodwill and all that. Anyway, back to recording me. On pages 53 and 55, the R slur appears again. I'm not going to say it. I just wanted to let you know that they were there. And I wrote, I'm thinking he's using the R slur to replace the word dummy or something similar, because otherwise the use on these 2 pages makes no sense. And honestly, either way, it makes no sense. It's not what the word means, and it shouldn't be said in this way. Or at all, really. Those are my exact notes. On page 60, I wrote, Lisa's thoughts towards Nicholas are so sweet. And honestly, it's just really nice to get her thoughts. I'm scrolling to find page 60. Give me a second. Thank you. Okay. Her thoughts are, Darling Nicholas, Lisa was thinking, poor sick baby. But you're ours and we love you. I know that like calling him sick isn't great now, but like back then that was an okay thought. And I just thought it was sweet. I just think that's like a sweet thought for someone of her age to understand that he's still theirs and they can still love him and he hasn't changed, even though some people's point of view on him might have changed and definitely feels like it's changed for some people, but not for her. And then on page 61, there's even more of Lisa's inner thoughts, but this time about Danny. And this is where it says, as they walked away, Lisa glanced back. She was remembering what Casey had told her about Danny that first morning. She tried to picture him as a baby, like Nicholas, in his cot. Someone must have loved him too. Perhaps he still had loving parents and a big sister. It's just really nice to get those thoughts from Lisa, trying to picture Danny and how he and Nicholas might be very similar. And then on pages 63 through 64, we get to know more about Casey's speech. This is originally in the episode as well. Casey's speech was originally going to be about the political storm in Hong Kong. Yeah, I wrote, that just feels wrong for a child. I don't like it. I just don't feel like that's something she would think about. And it's not really important that I wrote that down because it is in the episode. On page 61, we also get where it says, trigger warning, sorry for the thought of a dying animal. Sorry, trigger warning. Uh, Possibly, I guess, I don't know, because it's not really an animal that dies, but it does say Lisa clutched her head and put on a dying duck expression and slowly fell down again. Yeah, I just don't really know how to feel about that. Like, how do you know what a dying duck looks like? And do you really know that's what Lisa was trying to do? It just feels weird. And I didn't like it. I feel like it's supposed to be funny, but it's really not, and it's hard to picture, and I don't understand. I'm really just picturing the Aflac duck in that commercial where he faints. So maybe that's what she was going for. I don't know if the Aflac duck commercials were around back then or not. And then on page 67, I wrote a note where I said, I'd like more of Lisa's thoughts in this moment. And that's the moment where Griff says the R slur to Danny's face on page 67. Griff's mouth curled. You're a R slur. Everyone knows that. No, like a dog shaking off raindrops. Danny was shaking his head vigorously, trying to cast away the unkind words. Griff sensed this was no time to pursue his friendship with Lisa. He said, I go the other way. See you tomorrow. He headed off towards his own street. Lisa was left standing there with Danny, who looked close to tears. There's nothing wrong with me, he said. I know, Danny, Lisa reassured him sadly. She turned away from his distressed face to watch Griff striding away. Her dreams had been short-lived. Somehow Griff didn't seem so attractive anymore. I mean, technically there's nothing wrong with this. It's true to the episode, and it is described just fine to me. I just would have liked more of Lisa's inner thoughts in this moment, so that's why I wrote that down. And then on page 71, this is my last note for this episode. This says that Casey said, You were great, Lisa, for the 100th time. But truly, we only hear it once in the show, and Lisa didn't seem annoyed, as if Casey had said it too much. So technically, I know this is just an exaggeration. It just feels like an unnecessary one. The exact quote is, Casey was still full of admiration as they reached the intersection after school. You were great, Lisa, she said for the 100th time. That was a really good speech. So yeah, it just felt unnecessary to exaggerate that to me, and it felt unnecessary to make it sound as if Casey was annoying, when Casey is Lisa's best friend, and Casey wasn't doing anything wrong. So yeah. This chapter is very accurate to the episode, and that's good, but they added in what was unnecessary, aka the racism. So I would like that to be changed if there's a reprint. And I'm going to move on to the next episode just because I don't feel like I need to address it anymore. So our last episode in this book is Jeffrey Finds a Friend. And of course, before the episode officially starts, there is an illustration. And the illustration is of Griff and Jeffrey at the end of the episode when they're dropping off the papers with the wagon. And the quote underneath the illustration says, You want a hand with those papers? Griff asked. Jeffrey accepted thankfully. And afterwards, Griff suggested, we can have a hot cocoa or something at the moonlight. So again, I just feel like putting an illustration from the very end of the episode at the beginning of the episode novelization is just out of place, but otherwise the illustration's good. And then the episode novelization starts on page 77, and that's where my first note on it is. And my note says, I didn't know Jeffrey just moved here from Scarborough. It makes sense that he and Griff can both bond over being new kids. And I wrote that because it says, and I quote, Jeffrey Clayton wished his dad hadn't decided to move into the city from Scarborough last spring. All Jeffrey's friends were back in Scarborough. He didn't get to see them very often. About once every couple of months if he was lucky. And if Dad wasn't too busy to drive out there. And then I also put that it was funny that they used the term boss cats because I've never heard that term before. The exact quote is, according to Dad, Claytons were the best. Born winners, top dogs, boss cats. Next best thing to being born a Clayton was to marry one. Jeffrey sometimes wondered if Mom had got a bit bored with living up to her role as second banana to a born winner, and that was why she'd gone off on that long vacation to Grandpa Skazin's in Sweden, and was always finding reasons not to come home. So that's important because it notes where his mom is. We don't see either one of his parents in this episode, but Dad is explained as being off at work a lot, and apparently Mom is in Sweden with her father. And then on page 78, it says it's November. So yeah, this is the last time I will note when the timeline is. So to recap, in Rachel Runs for Office, it is September. In Griff Makes a Date, it is November. And then here, again, it is somehow still November. So, how is it November in episode 17? And then September in episode 19? And then, again, in episode 20, it is November. And my explanation for this is that Rachel Runs for Office is a flashback episode. Now, this is not stated in the book or in the episode, but it is literally the only way it makes sense. And I think that it is actually Casey telling Lisa what happened while she was gone, because Lisa's not in Rachel Runs for Office at all, and she comes back to Toronto, and Griff Makes a Date. So, even though the narration style doesn't change from any normal episode, so my theory might be wrong, but this is just my theory, and the book confirmed it for me. The book is actually why I have the theory. But either way, they all premiered a month apart, and the timeline does not make this make sense. I don't know why it was added in, and I may never know because I don't know who to ask. So, let me know if you have any fun theories about this down below if you've listened this far. This will be the real test for me to know if you've actually listened this far. But I'm just curious. It just does not make any sense. I can read the exact quote if you want me to. It says on page 78, as he came into the dining room that November afternoon, carrying his homework, he looked at Ingrid carefully. So yeah, it's November. And I just think that's interesting and important and confusing. And then my next note is for page 79, where it says, Jeff knew it would be Connie ahead of time, and they were at number 38 on Degrassi Street. So that's where it says, the doorbell rang. Ingrid made a move to answer it, but Jeffrey was pretty sure who it would be. I'll get it, he said firmly. He was right. It was Connie. On her evening newspaper route. About once a week, she rang the bell at number 38 Degrassi Street, instead of hurling the paper from the sidewalk to the porch. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting that he knew ahead of time and that this was something she regularly did. And then my next note is for page 81. It says that she thought, nerd. What a nerd. But in the episode, she actually does say it. And the exact quote is, Connie seethed with annoyance as she turned to go. Nerd. What a nerd, she thought, as she stamped down the steps. And then, sadly, the book does refer to him as a nerd when it says, the nerd leaned between the doorposts, feet astride, and then, trigger warning for a biblical reference, if that's something that triggers you, I don't know. A Samson of learning, master of the situation. Claytons were always the victors, his stance announced. So yeah, that is a reference to Samson and Delilah of the Bible. I'm 98% sure that's what that's a reference to. Otherwise, it makes no sense. So, And to me, that does confirm that Danny thinking of sheep was a biblical reference. But again, I can't know for sure. I'm just 98% sure. Anyway, on page 83, my note says, sad to see that Jeff seemed to know his classmates were making fun of him for losing to Connie. And I wrote that the actual quote is, as on most days, Jeffrey left on his own. Today he didn't care. He didn't want any sympathy for being toppled from first place. Not that it was likely to be offered. They were probably all glad that Connie had beaten him. So yeah, it's just sad to see that even though he was correct, the fact that he already knew that just felt sad to me. And then on page 85, Jeff was checking for missed calls to tell his dad about, not checking for calls from his dad. I think that was just something like I thought he was checking for calls from his dad. I feel like that would be the obvious thought, but it wasn't actually true. The exact quote is, Jeffrey's first job as soon as he got home was to check the answering machine in his dad's study. There might be important calls to pass on to Dad, but more often than not, there was a message from Dad himself, usually much the same message. He switched on, and he was dead right. And then on page 86, my next note says, it's interesting to see Jeff's views on his dad's success, and his dad's pressuring him to be successful. That seems to be the true, B plot of this episode that seems to be sprinkled throughout. And the exact quote is, he hadn't needed to be reminded to do his homework. He wished Dad wouldn't prod him quite so much. And he didn't need to be told about success either. All around the room, on the desk and filing cabinets, were symbols of Dad's success. Framed certificates, photographs, and sporting trophies. He let his glance rest on them for a moment, and then turned out the light. And then my next note is from page 88. It says, I didn't notice this kitchen blackboard in the episode, but it is in there. So it helps a lot to see it more in the book. And the quote on the blackboard is, congratulations on winning the science fair, Jeffrey. And the book says, if it had been left at that, okay, but it had to add, keep up the great work, nerd or not. He needed to put in some long hours. Again, just pointing out the pressure he gets from his father. It's nice to see that pointed out throughout. And then on page 94, we have my next note. It explains that Connie was trying to smile a certain way to hide her missing tooth. I didn't notice this in the episode because I also smile in a very clipped way that hides my teeth, and none of my teeth are missing. I just don't like them. So the exact quote is from page 94. Conscious of her missing tooth, she arranged a rather artificial and buttoned-up smile. So yeah, I didn't notice a missing tooth at all in the episode, so it's just nice to point that out. And then my next note is for page 95. It explains Connie would have helped Griff any other time, and that she didn't mean to admit that she needed to study. The exact quote is, no way, thought Connie. Any other time, maybe, but not tonight. Sorry, Griff, she said, sounding apologetic. I've got to study. She realized too late that it was a careless slip of the tongue. And then my next quote is for page 97. It explains that Jeff would also be glad to help any other time, just like Connie. And the exact quote is, Jeff groaned inwardly. Any other time, he'd have been glad to help, but not tonight of all nights. He tried to explain that he had too much to do. And then the next note is for page 99. It explains that Liz's concert with Robbie was a one-night sell-out show by a British rock group. So while that's not super important, I do enjoy seeing more of Liz's character fleshed out. And To me, that also sounds like a concert that the Liz from Degrassi Junior High era would go to. So it makes me curious if this Liz was inspiration for that Liz. But the exact quote is, "But Connie's test and Liz's own half-promises stood no chance against Robbie, and a one-night sell-out show by a British rock group. It's the concert of a lifetime, Connie. Sorry." So yeah, I just thought that was interesting to add to Liz's character. And then on page 100 is my next note. It says, "The doorbell rang at Connie's after Liz asked 2 questions. Also, it says that Griff extended his half hour to 55 minutes. So Jeffrey said he'd help out Griff for half an hour, and then he actually ended up helping out for 55 minutes at this point in the book. The exact quote is, "At the Clayton house, the allotted half hour had become 55 minutes, and Jeffrey and Griff, still at the dining room table, Jeffrey, overcome by hunger, had fetched his plate of rather dried up casserole from the oven." And then on page 101, it says, "Griff didn't start to understand until 40 minutes later." So over an hour and a half total. And I got that because I added 55 plus 40 to equal 95. So at this point, it's a total of 95 minutes of studying. We also get insight into Jeff's dad's bulletin board. And the exact quote I'm looking for is, "He glanced at his watch. Time was passing, but let's have one more go," he thought. 40 minutes later, Griff was actually showing signs of grasping what fractions were all about. Jeffrey wondered if a bowl of popcorn might speed up the process, and suggested a move to the kitchen. He stood over the saucepan of popping corn, watching Griff, who sat suddenly more cheerful, beside the kitchen bulletin board, where Dad's word for the day was, "Winning isn't the main thing, it's the only thing." "I'm going to win the struggle with Griff's brain," Jeffrey thought, "if it takes all night." It didn't take all night. Suddenly, about 10 o'clock, as if a light had been switched on in his head, a triumphant Griff shouted, "I get it! This is great! Thanks, Jeffrey." Jeffrey gave a tired but satisfied smile. And that last part is from page 102. It says, "They were there until 10 p.m. studying, but Connie's clock on the episode says 10:45 when Griff starts to leave." So I wrote that down because it just made me curious exactly what all explains, like, what were they doing in between 10 o'clock and 10:45. And then on page 103, Connie's dad told her she had to lights out at 9:45, but she was still up sneaking a study at 10:45. And the exact quote is, "Not far away, Connie was propped up in bed, memorizing the formulas in her textbook. She'd been in her room studying since early evening, and would still have been studying at her bedside desk if her dad hadn't insisted that 9:45 was time for lights out. Footsteps on the stairs made her reach for the lamp, and sent her diving under the covers. The door opened. Peeking through lowered lashes, she saw her mother doing her nightly check. The door closed, and her mother's footsteps went away. Connie switched on the lamp and returned to her book. Liz or no Liz, she was going to show Jeffrey Clayton who could win bets." So that's important to know, that Connie is up past her bedtime. And then my next note isn't all the way until page 106, where it says, "They have the order of events wrong. Jeffrey comes in after Mr. Mackey tells them not to turn over their papers yet." So that is at the top of page 106, where it says, Mr. Mackey raised sarcastic eyebrows. "Jeffrey, How good of you to join us. Jeffrey apologized and took his seat, returning Connie's defiant glare. Mr. Mackey looked around the class. Do not turn your papers over until I tell you to do so. And I hope you have all studied this time. So in the episode, that order of events is backwards. And then there's another note that says, and it says Terry's suspension was lifted for the test, but the episode says her suspension was only meant to be a day long. So the exact quote is, his eyes lingered on Terry, whose suspension, to everyone's surprise, had been lifted for the test. So really that just makes it sound like her suspension was paused for the test instead of just a day long, and that kind of confused me a bit. And then my next note is on the next page, page 107. It says, Connie said, see you tomorrow. And then Jeff echoed it. But in the episode, no one says that. So the exact quote is, see you tomorrow, said Connie happily. She could afford to be friendly, having won the bet and made her point. See you tomorrow, echoed Jeffrey. And tomorrow, and the next day, for 2 weeks. So what? A bet was a bet. And then my next note is on page 108. It says 4 points too low, but the episode says 3. So you would think that the score had changed when it actually had not, because it says, hi Griff, congratulations. 65 is a pretty good mark. Griff replied that 85 wasn't bad either. Jeffrey pointed out ruefully that it was 4 points too low to win. But in the episode he says 3 points, so you would think that the score had changed, but you can know that it doesn't, because before this on page 107 it says, at their questioning faces, she shrugged and asked, how else do you think I got 88%? I'm not brilliant, you know. So in the show and in the book, she still gets 88%. They just did the math wrong in the book, which I guess normally I wouldn't point that out, but this whole episode / novelization is about math, and I am bad at math, so I noticed it. Anyway, my last note is for page 109, where it says, Jeff thought he could be a teacher, and then he said, then the thought was, maybe he was cut out to be a teacher. Maybe he was going to be the first Clayton to train winners instead of being one. I just didn't really like that thought. We don't need to say that teachers aren't winners. It's mean, first of all. And second of all, Linda Schuyler is a teacher at this point. And I just don't think that thought is true to her, even though she didn't want to be a teacher. That doesn't mean teachers can't be winners, and all winners need to be trained. It's an important job, and I don't think we need to make fun of it. Editing me here, editing in the last note from Jocelyn. She said, I think when Jeff said, maybe I'll be a teacher, maybe I'll be the first to train a winner, I heard that line and felt like he was saying he'll train a winner because that's what teachers do. And it felt like praise to teachers to me, but I didn't read the book, so maybe I'm misinterpreting. And my response to that was, it was the way it said instead of being one. That felt mean to me. But otherwise, yeah, I can see that. I'll edit in your notes throughout because I think you had some really great points. And then she responded with, for the Jeffrey thing, I read it as I'm teaching winners instead of just being a winner. As in, it's good to help other people, not just try to be the best all on your own. So, yeah, I think it's just like he felt like his father wouldn't appreciate him being a winner if you were a teacher, or like maybe his father thought you can't be a winner and a teacher, or maybe like, and this could have been how society at the time felt about teachers, or how Eve Jennings, our main author, felt about teachers. Truly, I don't know. And either one of us could have misinterpreted it, but that's how I felt at the time, so that's what I wrote in my notes, and that's what I read off of. I do feel like teachers are really important. I had a lot of great teachers when I was younger, So it's good to have this second opinion and express this second opinion, as well as my first one. So if you're a teacher and you're listening, please know that you are loved and appreciated. And I hope you have a great year teaching. I hope your kids are awesome. And back to recording me. And that's Griff Makes a Date. I apologize for all of the many instances of the things I trigger warned you for. I hope my trigger warnings helped and that you're feeling okay after all that, and that Jeffrey Finds a Friend was a good way to lighten it up and end it out. In total, it was true to the show for the most part, and I think they did a decent job of sticking to that, at least. Next time, instead of doing Griff Gets a Hand, which is book number 3 in the series, we're going to take a small detour into Banned Book Month and talk about the history of banned books and kind of which Degrassi books I think would be banned if they were being focused on during this time of banned books as well, presently. Please know this is not because I want books to be banned. That's not how I feel at all. But just because I think it's important to focus on, and Degrassi has a history of being banned in general, so I do think it fits pretty well. So if you have any thoughts on banned books and you would like to be included in the next episode, you can send me a message of them on Instagram at Lucy0520. That's LUCEY0520. And if you send me a voice message, I'll try to play it in the next episode. But if not, you can just type me a regular message and I'll read it out loud. Thank you. Bye.